So welcome to the Merit Education Rounds. I am Dr. Elif Bilgic, and I'm an education scientist in the Department of Pediatrics and at Merit. So Merit, which is also McMaster Education Research, Innovation and Theory Program, is an education services program in the Faculty of Health Sciences dedicated to advance health professions education scholarship with a vision to grow a community of scientists and clinicians to advance health professions education through research and applied science. Although today's education rounds is virtual, many of us in this event are connected by the land on which we work. So I take this time to recognize that McMaster University is on the traditional territory shared between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Anishinaabe Nations, which was acknowledged in the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt. That wampum uses the symbolism of a dish to represent the territory and one spoon to represent that the people are to share the resources of the land and only take what they need. And before leaving the stage to our esteemed guest today, I will provide a brief introduction. The title of today's education round is Navigating the Scholarly Landscape, Understanding APC Waivers, Predatory Publishing, and Research Metrics in Academic Publishing. And we have Ms. Neera Bhatnagar as our speaker. Ms. Bhatnagar is the head of public services and systems and coordinator of research support at the Health Sciences Library at McMaster University. In addition to her senior manager role in the library, she's actively involved with the research teams working on systematic reviews, practice guidelines, and other complex topics. Also, she's interested in open access publishing, evidence-based practice in healthcare, and exploring the use of artificial intelligence technologies. With her expertise in mind, the rounds today will focus on research support initiatives in the Health Sciences Library, including article processing charge, waivers, predatory publishing practices, and the evolving area of research metrics. Now, during the rounds, feel free to use the chat for comments and questions, as I will ask those during the Q&A period. Also, during the Q&A, you can ask questions by using the hand-raising function. So without further ado, please go ahead, Neera.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, so as you know, this is my topic area. So I'm going to talk about some key areas around scholarly publishing and in particular, APC waivers, predatory publishing, and research metrics. I know a land acknowledgement was already just completed, but I do want to honor and give thanks to the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations, as they are the traditional inhabitants of the land that McMaster and our hospitals may sit on. So just want to acknowledge that we do owe them a debt, and recognize that our responsibility as guests is to honor and respect the intimate knowledge and their relationship with the land that we currently inhabit. So my session will really be focusing on the three pieces that I just mentioned, but I also want to give you an idea of some of the initiatives that we currently have, and just any brief updates on what the library is doing. And where you're going to be able to find more information about a lot of the concepts or topics that I'm covering today. So I do want to start with just a quick reminder of some of the initiatives that we're working on. This has now been around for a while, but I'm not sure of how many people are aware of it. But we have something called the Researcher's Toolkit. And the toolkit is really a place to be a one-stop shop for a lot of your needs as you go through the research cycle. Now, it's not fully comprehensive, and I recognize that some of the links that we put in place here may be more related to paper-based research rather than bench research, but it can still give you ideas and give your students ideas on where to start, things to keep in mind as you go through the research cycle. So a couple of what I'm going to be talking about today are embedded in this toolkit. We also have changed a little bit some of our services that we've offered as a result of the pandemic. So we've kind of had to pivot like everybody on a dime. So we, as you know, we've always done interlibrary loans, but now we've made or created a slightly more robust document delivery service, and that is more like your chapter scans or your article requests, as long as they're relatively limited in numbers. So if you're doing a systematic review and think that the library is going to be able to provide all your articles, we'll probably write back and say you've submitted 100 requests. We can't do that because I don't have the manpower. Another area that we've also improved on is try to do a little bit more coordination with our library partners in the hospitals, and more importantly, especially around MUMSI in particular, to help streamline that and to give you quick information and resources and access to articles in a timely manner. And yes, I recognize that you would love to have access if you're not affiliated with McMaster, and unfortunately, our licenses do restrict our online access to only our university staff and academic affiliates. So that's why we're working with the hospital partners. But one of the changes that we've made is, obviously, like everybody else, we do offer virtual help now. So a lot of our consultations have moved almost entirely virtually at the request of the students or the researcher. We still offer workshops and presentations. And when I'm talking about reference help here, I mean we have drop-in help at any time between 9 and 5, Monday to Friday, in the library. So just like we had before, you could walk into the library, or your students could, and get help. But now we also offer some virtual help as well. And then some of the key areas around research that we're supporting and that I continue to find funding for are three key ones. Two ones in particular you may have already been aware of. The Health Sciences Library is offering access to Covidence. We did secure some funding to provide this initiative. So I highly recommend it. I mean, it is just one in a number of platforms that researchers can use to manage their projects. And when I talk about projects, I'm really thinking of your knowledge syntheses projects. Similarly, we did this actually in tandem. Our request went in for both Covidence and EndNote. So we now offer EndNote to our campus affiliates, basically our campus faculty, staff, students, and our academic affiliates. So it's not that I'm just endorsing it or saying you must use it, but I wanted it to be one of the options available to our grad students and our researchers. And McMaster already pays enough to try and provide this to some of their students through grant money, or they might be doing it to their research team. So we just thought this might be an easier way to offer it to the entire campus, even those who may not have access to funding. And then the last one is Lean Library, and this is brand new, so I'm not sure how many people have explored it. It's actually a plugin browser. So if you think of your browser, think of this as a plugin that you're going to put as an extension. And the whole purpose of the Lean Library is to try and streamline access to information easily. So really, now, I don't know if you've ever used it, because sometimes when I use it, I can find it a bit annoying. So it just depends on your appetite for pop-ups. But what this will do is, let's say you're looking at a citation to an article or possibly even a book, and you are curious if we have it. Well, Lean Library might be running in the background, will pop up and say, hey, check and see if McMaster owns it. And then we'll prompt you to log into your username and password, which is basically your Mac ID, email address. So it's meant to try and reduce the frustration of trying to access resources that may not have the Get It link. So in particular, I'm thinking of things like Google Scholar, sometimes even in PubMed. We may not have the Get It link there or the way that you're accessing it. So, it's one way to just get quick access to things. Another brand new resource, we literally just launched this, is called Gideon. So if you're at all interested in infectious disease, Gideon is a global infectious disease and epidemiology network. And really, it's got a lot of epidemiologic data dating back to like centuries. It's huge. It covers about 230 countries. So the idea is this is intended for global infections. It also helps to identify some pathogens and infectious diseases. It's very large. It's very robust. I actually had a demo of it in the fall, and that sort of what gave us an idea that this could be useful for our global health partners, but also given the pandemic and everything, there could be some useful information. So I just want you to be aware that this is a new tool, and I highly recommend that you explore it. Another thing that we offer, or I should say the main campus offers, is the research data management strategy. So if you've ever had to apply for a grant through the tri-agency, you'll know that they often will require a research data management plan. Well, similarly, they've now required institutions that get the grants to have a policy in place. And so our team has been working on that strategy, and it's in draft at the moment. But you're welcome to comment on it. I mean, the draft is, I feel like it's almost going to be in perpetuity because we're always going to be tweaking it. But the RDM team also offers a wide range of services, including workshops, events, and they actually have a community of practice. And I'm not sure how many people are aware of that. But their community of practice, they usually meet once a month. And it's a great way to explore different aspects of research data management. So I'd highly recommend it. And if you're curious to see what one might look like, think about January 25th. If you happen to be free at 11 a.m., and these sessions are recorded as well, they're going to be exploring how research centers and large-scale studies actually manage their data. So they have a couple of guest speakers from the Offord Center for Child Studies and also from the Canadian Longitudinal Health, the Study on Aging, who will talk a little bit about their experiences and what they've learned and, you know, best practices, et cetera. It's just intended to be a community of practice, and they meet in teams. So it's fun. And I've learned a lot just by attending them. And sometimes, you know, they could talk about a wide range of topics, including, say, access to sensitive and restricted data, how to anonymize things, you know, the ethics around the use of data, so etc. Just, you know, keep your eyes on it if you're interested. Another area that you might find useful is the library data services. This service actually is great if you're interested in maybe trying to get access to some statistical data, the community data portal. So that's the Hamilton portal. There's also a platform called Odyssey. It's a data portal. And in there, you're going to find a lot of survey data, anything from like Gallup, Ipsos, Reid. They have a number of survey tools that they have access to. And they also have some business and statistic data. So contact them if you are interested in getting some assistance or harnessing some information in there. StatsCan data is also available in their census. So they're really useful and available to assist. So I just wanted, as researchers, to just remind you that you do have help there. And then something that's really brand new for us in the Health Sciences Library is our book club kits. So we have now created 10 unique, basically, book club kits. And inside each kit is 10 copies of the book, plus a facilitated guide. The idea is it's focusing on equity, diversity, and inclusion. We actually submitted a grant proposal for this to the McMaster Okanagan special project, and we were funded for that. So this is our sort of foray into this area. And the goal is to help a group, and any group can choose to do this, whether it's a tutorial group or a faculty member who wants to explore this, or it's just students on their own, where they want to like deepen their learning around this area, but through the use of storytelling. And it's nice because it aligns with McMaster's and especially FHS's philosophy around self-directed learning. And the kits do have a facilitated guide to help you uh, sort of walk you through the discussions and things to keep in mind. And the titles range from anywhere from Indigenous memoirs to maybe the biography of the first female pilot. There's also a biography on, women's experience with homelessness in Hamilton. So it's a wide range of topic areas. So I highly recommend that you just explore that. They are available in the library catalog. All you have to do is just search book club kits, and you'll come across the 10 titles. So that's really just a very quick update of our resources that we have. And mostly what I'm going to be talking about now is really navigating our scholarly landscape and including especially the publishing area. So I want to start with what are APCs, because my guess is you have come across these. And my goal is to try and give you an idea of what we actually are paying for. So before I just launch into that, let me just set the stage. So what are article processing charges, or APCs? If you think about it, all you see is a dollar sign, and they're fairly large. And you wonder, what are these fees used for? So really think of this as the fees that are used to offset the journal production cost. So we're talking about everything from managing your peer review to editing to hosting the journal and archiving it. And they're often payable at the time of acceptance. So once your publication has been accepted to the journal, you have to pay your fee. Now, these fees historically have ranged from 3,000 to 5,000 USD. Now, I have seen that lower in some cases, but I've also seen it also much higher. I have seen a 7,000 USD, and just recently I came across one which was like 9,000 euros. So thinking about that, I'm wondering, what is the publisher doing? Because it really doesn't cost 9,000 euros to host one article. So what I do recommend is that you consult the journal's author information for really details on the actual cost of their publication fees, because they do vary. They can vary from journal to journal, even within the same publishers. I also wanted to just remind everybody that if you are applying for a grant, especially from the tri-agency, that's an eligible expense, and that's because they require the article to be open access within 12 months, which means that they'll also help fund the making the article open access. So before I really delve into what are the agreements that we have, I really have to set the stage on making sure everybody's aware of what are the different publishing models, because it helps to understand what you're actually accessing and how do you read some of the guides that we provide. So if you think about the traditional publishing model, this is what you're historically used to, where the content literally was behind a paywall, and libraries like ours needed to subscribe to the journal in order to access the article. And then you would access the entire journal depending on what we paid for, right? But this model, there is no article processing charges. You were never charged a fee. You just submitted your journal article, and it was accepted and published. Now, in this new world, publishers are recognizing that people do want open access. So some publishers, not all, have made their content open access after what we call an embargo period, or a period where they are going to lock it down and put it behind a paywall. And that's entirely at the discretion of the publishers. And it can range from 6 months, I've seen it, to 12 months, which tends to be somewhat of the norm, but I've also come across 36 months and even up to 48 months. So why do the publishers do this? It's because they recognize it's in health science and sciences that many of the value of these articles is the latest research on a topic. So if they put it behind a paywall, that means somebody is still going to pay for it. And then they can, at any time, they can revoke that because they own the journal, they own the articles, they can decide what they want to do with it. So it goes back to their copyright retention. So they don't have to continue to offer it open access, even if they have in the past. And I have seen journals flip and decide to change it after a certain period. Similarly, this is the new world that we're inhabiting. It's called, we in the library land tend to refer to it as hybrid journal publishing, and also in publishing land, I should point that out. And this is sort of a funky mix. So this is where some content might be behind a paywall, and that requires a subscription to access it, and some content could be open access. And the choice of whether or not it'll be open is entirely up to the researcher, depending on whether or not they choose to pay the article processing charges. So if you don't pay the fee, you can still be accepted to the journal, and it's just behind a paywall. In addition, some of these authors, just like in the traditional model, they might make their journal fully open access after that embargo period of 12 months or more. But again, they own it. So they could choose to put it back behind the paywall at a future date, except for any of the content where the author paid the APC article charge right up front. And then also keep in mind that the publishers retain copyright unless if you pay the article processing charge, they will allow you the option to retain that. So you do need to keep consulting with the submission process just to make sure that if you have that option, you do retain it. And I'm going to talk a little bit about copyright in a minute because that is important. And then you have the perfect world of open access publishing, where everything is available open and immediately. So there's no embargo. You can access the articles the minute it's published. Now that's where the article processing charges really come into play, because that's their only source of revenue for the publishers. And that's why they can sometimes be expensive. Because if you think back to what do the fees cover, they have to cover the manpower, the archiving, the online platform, and all those other things that I had mentioned earlier. So we will often refer to these kinds of journals as gold journals. So they're fully open access, you pay up front. And then the other piece that most journals will allow the author to do, and that's retain their copyright. So when you're submitting to one of these journals, I again highly recommend that you take a look at their submission process and just confirm that if you have that option, you are in fact retaining your copyright. Now, why are we even going down this road? So recently, so within the last few years, the libraries have been working on getting some agreements in place with publishers to try and either cover the cost of the APC, so we call these APC waivers, with a particular goal in mind, which is to try and help some of the early career researchers, and that includes your grad students or medical residents. It could be research that doesn't have any funding attached to it, or researchers that have limited funding. So we want to try and provide a bit of help to getting your articles out there and have them immediately open access, and maybe be able to publish in some of these gold journals. Ideally, that's what we're aiming for, is the gold journals, and to improve the access and visibility of the research that McMaster is doing, right? But it is going to take time, and you're going to see there's some limitations, and that's also what I want to point out. So what are some of the waivers that we currently have in place? So here are some of the publishers that the agreements are currently active. And this is where it became important to explain what hybrid and gold is, because you can see something like Cambridge University Press, we have a waiver that will cover both journals that they publish. So both, if you like, their catalog or their stables that include those kinds of journals. However, in other cases like Sage, hybrid, it's only their hybrid journals. Now there's 900 plus journal titles that are included in there. So it's still pretty robust, but it's not everything that Sage Publishing offers. And it does, so read the fine print, it does exclude a small number of titles. So just because we might have the Sage choice doesn't necessarily mean that we have access to the entire collection. So I'm going to show you some tips on how you can find the journals without, making yourself too crazy. And then the TEMA ones you might find useful as well. And one of the key ones too that we're offering is that might be of interest to this group is the PLAWS. So right now we have the APC waivers on PLAWS and the Wiley hybrid. So once again, it excludes any of the Wiley Gold open access journals. So I'm going to show you a website that does give you more details on the agreements, especially the terms. So just for illustration, in this case, the PLAWS one is the Gold journal. And really what I wanted to point out is that it includes the entire suite. So right now that includes about 12 to 14 titles. And the submission process for the various titles might be slightly different. So just take a look as you're going through it. What does it mean? But you'll notice that we have a limited number of journals and journal publishers that we currently do the waiver. So you may have noticed, for example, that while we're supporting PLAWS, you may not see BMC. So I'm talking about Biomed Central as one of those options. And that's because, again, Biomed Central is now owned by a publisher, Springer Publishing, and they have always made it very difficult for an institution to try and put one of these agreements in place. So they've been a bit challenging. So just to walk you through some of the challenges on how you can access these article processing waivers. The first thing to keep in mind, so I'm going to do it for PLAWS, but everybody is different. So the key thing to keep in mind is that you need to look at what their website says. So the submission to authors, read that information. So for PLAWS, they recommend that you log into the platform or their editorial manager, basically form. And in there, you need to actually edit your author profile. So if you've ever submitted an article or a manuscript to PLAWS, you do have to create one of these profiles in order to upload your manuscript. So in this case, we want to make sure that you affiliate your profile with McMaster, because that's a trigger on their end as well to let them know that you are part of this agreement. Also declare that your affiliation is part of that payment process step. So that's why it's important to do this, because it will help authenticate you at the back end to get the waiver. And then the last thing I will mention is, in addition to this, is once you're in this platform, the library really cannot answer any of your questions because we don't have access to their platforms. So really, you do need to contact the publishers if you're running into any questions or problems around the submission process, etc. But when you're in the process of submitting your manuscript, part of that will be how are you going to pay for your article processing charges? So what I did was I took a screenshot of one for PLAWS to say that you have to select the options and you have to sort of figure out which option makes the most sense. So for PLAWS, the one that I recommend is this one here, which says my institution will fully or partially pay the fee as a member, and then they actually provide a link. So if you ever want to double check and make sure you're in the right place, that's where you go. So again, PLAWS made it pretty easy. The other thing I like about PLAWS is they've actually created a video targeting authors who are doing the submissions, just to ensure that you understand their process and give you any information possible. Now, one of the things that I really need to point out is that in many cases, it's not going to be as straightforward as I just showed you in PLAWS, because PLAWS is a gold open access journal. In these hybrid world, you might actually have to make an informed decision, right? So in, for example, Wiley, their waiver process is you need to select the third option, which is basically that you're requesting a waiver for the article processing charge. And again, it will look at your McMaster affiliation and then say, oh, you're eligible for the waiver. It's not transparent, it's not straightforward. And the key to think about here, folks, is that you have to opt in. So this is what I don't like about a lot of these, is it's not automatic. So I am going to keep pointing out to opt in whenever possible, because we're already paying for it. And I'd hate to see us pay for it multiple times. First in our agreement, because we paid for the waivers, and then similarly for the authors individually, not realizing that we have the waiver, pay for it again. So how do you find the journals that might be included in the waiver process, or in this case, the hybrid journals, what is included or excluded? So when I'm on Wiley's website, for example, I would click on open access, and then, believe it or not, at the bottom of the screen, you would scroll down and look for this silly little button called Hybrid OA Price List. So it's not even obvious. And once you click on that, it actually opens up a spreadsheet that has the name of the journals plus their price list. But these are all the journals that would be included in the hybrid waiver. So you wouldn't have to pay any of those processing charges. I know it sounds really wonky, but unfortunately, that is right now the way to do it. For example, another publisher, Sage, as you recall, I had mentioned that there's 900 plus titles included in there. So they have a very small link embedded in this paragraph that says, click here to find out the titles that you could access. Again, it's not clear, it's not straightforward. And if you recall, I also mentioned that there are some titles that are excluded from that waiver. So just below that, they provide a link to what are those titles, just in case you're curious and you don't want to get yourself caught in one of those processes. So those were really our waivers. Now I want to distinguish that from discounts. So the waivers are fully funded, we'll pay for them. But the discounts might be a discount on the article processing charges, but you may also have to pay. So for example, the American Chemical Society, we have a $250 flat rate, US flat discount. So that's what you're getting, the discount. For something like Elsevier Science, we only have a 20% discount off both their hybrid journals and their gold open access journals, okay? And unfortunately, that will exclude some of the key journals like their Cell Press publications, the Lancet, and some of their society-owned. So you really have to read the fine print, and I'm going to show you a website that brings together a lot of this information for you. Other ones that you might be interested in for some of these discounts are things like Taylor and Francis has a pretty good list of journals. They're in their hybrid collection. And of course, the Sage Gold Open Access. So if you recall, we gave you the full waiver for the hybrid journals, but for Sage Gold, it's a 40% discount. So they were able to negotiate a really good deal for this. And in case you're wondering, how did we come up with these deals? McMaster works with a national group to actually negotiate with the publishers these kinds of deals. And then the national group will then offer them to the universities to opt in or out of. So it helps when we do it nationally because we have much more strength in numbers and power. So we're off, and they are that kind of group is funded sort of centrally as well. So it helps to have other people offering these same deals. So if you were a recent, say, researcher from another institution, you might see similar kinds of waivers offered at those institutions because these are Canada-wide and McMaster opted in for them. So some of the things to think about is what are our challenges and these discounts and these waivers. And the key one that I want to point out here is they're not all automatic. They do require you to opt in many cases. So like I said, I'd hate to see us pay for it twice. Publishers have different standards. They all look different. The way you're going to submit your manuscript and opt in and out is going to look different. Their websites may not be very clear, their terms of agreement. You want to keep in mind, especially from our perspective, when does the agreement end? Because it is possible we're in the process of negotiating one. A good example is Elsevier Science, that 20% discount. The last I checked is that it actually expired at the end of December of this year, but I know for sure they're working on a new agreement right now, so stay tuned. Let's see what is offered. So in order to get access to these resources, you do need to be a McMaster employee or have a current academic appointment or student. And you need to use your McMaster email. So I need to stress that. And it's during the submission process. So really in your author profile, use your McMaster. And I do mean McMaster. I don't mean your med portal, because the @mcmaster.ca email address is your official university one. And it is the only one that a lot of publishers know to flag for us. So how do you find out what kinds of agreements we currently have in place? The easiest way is to look at this website, which is our publishing agreements. And it is a combination of both our discounts and our waivers. And you'll notice from the screenshot that I do point out the terms. So for example, in the American Chemical Society, this one's going to expire at the end of this year. If you recall, PLAWS will expire in 2025. So I recognize that everything I just showed you was very cumbersome. So I'm just letting you know that the library is working on a new tool. It's not available yet. It's coming soon. And it's a search tool for finding journal titles that have open access agreements. So these would be titles that are either in our national or local publishing agreements that we participate in, and they could be whether they're fully funded or partially funded. So we're trying to get this up and running. So here's a sneak preview. So if you look at, I typed in PLAWS, so it came up with PLAWS Water. And just to show you, it's saying that who pays, it's saying that we pay. It gives you a little bit of information about the licensing options and then the publishing model. So again, if you think back to my open access or golds versus another one. So when I searched something like health education, for example, the American Journal of Health Education is a Taylor and Francis. And if you recall, I said we have a 15% discount. So we just point out there is a discount there. It's a hybrid, so that's what it's trying to tell you from the publishing model. And there might be some options for licensing. And because this is under construction, I really don't know what some of the options are. When will this be available for the public? Stay tuned, because believe it or not, we have to populate this product where we have to identify the journal. Do we have an agreement? So these are like, think about it. We had 900 titles just for Sage alone. So we've got to make sure that the titles are in there, they've been tagged correctly, and they're linking out to the appropriate place. So wait maybe 3 to 4 weeks, and I'm hoping you'll see a launch of this. And the other thing I wanted to point out is that I really think it's important that you retain your author rights. You have no idea how many people might actually pay these author fees, but then forget to investigate if whether or not you can have the Creative Commons license where the author retains their rights. because unfortunately you have to, again, opt in. It's always in the best interest of the publishers to have the rights instead of you. And just to give you an idea, about 17% of authors chose to opt out of the retaining their rights when we received a report last year. So I was kind of surprised about that. And similarly, in another piece, actually it was 19% opted out. And then just recently, I received in the fall a report where one of the publishers pointed out that 17% of the authors chose to opt out of retaining their copyright, even though we covered the APC cost. So you still can't do a lot with it if you don't opt in. So you need to, have your Creative Commons so that you can repurpose, reuse your work, and you want to get credit for it as well. So just before I move on, and I know we're getting short on time, so I might have to just fly through a little bit of this and then suggest that if you're interested in any of these other pieces that we could look at this in more detail later, is predatory publishing. But do you have any questions about APCs or article processing fees, or how do you access them? Okay, so moving on to predatory publishing. So I really wanted to marry these two together because they could look very similar. Predatory publishing really is, if you think about it, you're going to hear many names for these, like fake publishing and alternative funding publishing and sham journals. Really, the idea is they're trying to dupe you into publishing your hard-earned research and your articles in a journal that's less than stellar. So things to keep in mind when you're trying to identify a journal is look for unsolicited emails. I don't see so many of them now as I had in the past, but they can have, unrealistic promises like fast peer review time. They lack focus. There's lack of transparency on their author fees, and they're very inconsistent and often might have typos and lack, not very good grammar. And my favorite is they might have they might mention editors who are not really editors. So you got to do a little bit of digging to see if in fact that's the case. You'll also see that they might actually quote fake metrics. That one is my favorite. It's like sometimes they'll make up a metric, make up a name, give it a number, make it look good, and not even make you even aware that this is happening. And they will often they're very good, by the way, they're very sophisticated. So they will often have very similar names or very close names to real legitimate journals. And they can look very professional now. If you've ever looked at a predatory publishing website, some of those journals are really hard to tell which one's the fake and which is the real. And they're targeting the very same people that we were trying to help with our APC waivers and discounts, which is early career researchers. So you may not even be aware that you are their prized target. And just wanted to show you some of the metrics, the fake metrics that you might see. So one of the common ones that we use in proper publishing is the ISI impact factor. That comes out of Web of Science. And now you can see there's a few variations on that ISI, which mean absolutely nothing. They're actually fake, but they were trying to build on so the Web of Knowledge, Web of Science Clarivate's work. So really, I want you to think about this as they're really opportunistic publishers that are trying to exploit your need to publish, and they just want to get your article. So keep in mind, it's not really totally lost. Your research is out there. It's just probably not out there in the best place possible. So what you want to do is you want to try and avoid that. So things to keep in mind are exactly like the characteristics that I just pointed out. Look at the transparency, right? Do you see a peer review process? Does it make sense? And one of the key things that I use is look to see where the journal is indexed. In other words, are they included in our key databases, such as PubMed, Medline in particular, Embase, ERIC, the key places that you would look at. Look at their impact measurements. So those are your journal citation reports, or is it in Scopus or something like that? What I've done in the past is I've actually searched the web to see if there's been any complaints about the publisher or the journal. Is the peer review process clear, transparent? And do your colleagues read this journal, right? Would you recommend it to somebody? And are the article processing charges clearly laid out? So those are the things you want to think about. And just like with our APCs, we also have a website that sort of walks you through how to avoid predatory publishing. And we even have a checklist available on this website. It's a PDF, so you can just download it and use it. That is really helpful in helping you to identify those journals. And I highly recommend the standard that you may have heard of or not, called a Think, Check, Submit, which is like an international initiative to try and again bring awareness to researchers on how to avoid it. Similarly, keep in mind those same tactics could be used for predatory conferences. So you may not even be aware that those things even exist, but they very much do. And they are very similar to real conferences. You really want to look at the lineup of speakers and are they charging high fees, and are they even related to the academic field that the speakers are speaking of. So they're a really good source of revenue for the predatory folks. And then finally, there are research metrics. So if you're going to do all this kind of work, you might as well get some value for it. So what are research metrics? If you really think about it, they're basically numerical indicators that talk about the impact or help to show the impact of your research, right? So you can use them to help benchmark your career progress. You can help to communicate your research findings effectively from a program perspective. So think of merit. You could actually look at, see what impact is the program actually having, or my research institute doing. And then finally, they do help with our institutional rankings. So if you're thinking about metrics, there are multiple kinds of metrics that you want to be aware of. So you're already probably familiar with citation-based metrics. Those are things like your H factor, your citation, how many citation references you've had for your article. I talked about the journal metrics, which are like your impact factors, and there's many more. There's things like the Eigen score of a journal. And then there's more advanced metrics too, which are more specialized, and they can be looking at a combination of publications and citations, but looking at it from a global perspective, or looking at it through an impact analysis. So if you think about it, what do you need to do in order to actually do this? First thing I'm going to recommend to get really accurate metrics is to create an author profile. So in order to do that, many cases, you have to do this anyway, so I don't feel bad telling you to do it, is to create an ORCID username and password, and which means that you will get an ORCID ID. The reason for that is a lot of times when you're submitting your manuscript, publishers are now asking you for your ORC ID, so definitely have one available. But if you're going to do that, you might as well harness its complete field and get the most out of it. So what you're going to do with doing these author profiles is you actually will get credit for your work. And you now don't have to worry about whether you have variations on your author identity. So sometimes you might be publishing, say, with your middle initial. Other times you may not have. You may be inconsistent, but you still want ownership of that. You want to be able to get your metric accurately. And it helps to distinguish you from somebody else with a similar name. So do keep that in mind. They are free, and the key ones that we tend to use are ORCID, Google Scholar profiles, you can create your own. Once you do, it's amazing. Google Scholar goes to town and will actually populate it pretty well. And then there's Researcher ID, which is actually attached to Web of Science. And the two and all of these can be easily married together. And if you're a faculty member or a researcher, you might have a profile in Mac Experts. And actually, Mac Experts will pull some of the citations for using your researcher ID or your ORCID ID. And the nice thing is, Mac actually offers a single sign-on. So nobody, including myself, remembers what my ORCID username and password is. But I can marry the two together, and we walk you through a process so that I can use my McMaster username and password and actually get into my ORCID account. So I do recommend that. But having said things that, the metrics are great, I do want to point out that they're not, perfect. So you got to keep in mind that they don't replace your traditional research impact assessments. They need to be considered in context. So you can't really compare apples and oranges. So, researcher in subject A might look very different from researching and research metrics in subject B because of the amount of research that's published out there. The accessibility of the journals, et cetera, et cetera. Also keep in mind the length that the author and researcher might have been in the profession. That will impact your metrics. And that your metrics aren't all universal. So I will point that out. So you will look at Google Scholar, for example, I've looked at my H index, and I see that it looks very different in Google Scholar than it does in Web of Science. And that is precisely because they use a different algorithm to come up with those numbers. In Google Scholar's case, I am a little wary because they are not transparent, right? And similarly, if you are using metrics, do keep in mind the alt metrics, because you want to harness the impact that your research is having in today's world, being picked up by the news cycle and some of the media right now, social media, etc. So again, I have a guide that will walk you through a lot of how do you, what are the research metrics? How do you use them? How do you create a researcher profile? Who do you contact if you're interested in learning more about research metrics and using them, harnessing them? And we offer workshops. We could offer workshops for a particular group or a subgroup or your department if you're interested. So just be aware that the library is here to help. We're trying to make this as user-friendly and easy as possible, but recognizing that a lot of this is quite in-depth, right? So there's a lot of pieces, there's a lot of moving parts to each of these three components that I talked about today. And that's why the researcher's toolkit that I pointed out earlier has all these pieces in them. So the predatory publishing and the APC guide waivers, they're in the write and publish section. But if you want to harness the metrics, then look at our share and impact tab, and under there we'll have a link to the toolkit. You can also look directly into our guide as well to walk you through the process. So if you have any questions about anything that we covered today, you're welcome to ask me now. I realize that I'm a bit over time, but also you can send us an email to the library. It'll be then forwarded to me. We have a scholarly communication address as well that a group of us are monitoring. So you can send your question to them as well. And then our metrics, as I had pointed out. So I realized that I covered a lot, went very quickly over the last two sections, but I'm happy to answer any questions, if there are.
Thank you so much, Neera. It was very, very insightful. We always learn new things, I think. If anyone has any questions, you can use the comment function, like I said at the beginning, or just raise your hand and feel free to speak up. I see this here, Janila, are saying thank you, that this is an excellent talk and an overview of the resources, and definitely I'll just, does anyone have any questions or comments or just any form of feedback? I mean, I'll ask something actually, Neera. So it's sometimes, look, I think of this, and when we look at sort of health professions education, yes, there are journals with great impact factors, but there are ones that don't have high impact factor at all, but they're still impactful. That ones that the professions education community look at. I'm just wondering if you could comment on how us as researchers can really navigate between that. In a way, I find that a conflict almost of importance, but then not necessarily being reflected in those impact factors.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I said use metrics cautiously. But I do recommend then looking at where the journal is picked up. At the end of the day, when you publish, the idea is you really want people to find your research, right? And be able to use it and build on it. And that's why it's important just to make sure that it is indexed in a key database that your researchers typically use. So if you're publishing in education and health education, you'd like to make sure that the journal is picked up in ERIC, or it's picked up in Medline PubMed, or in Embase, for example, right? If you're publishing in, I heard you also say that you're in PEDS, so you might be looking at it through the lens of pediatrics, but in education, well, then look at a PEDS journal as well, right? But what I'm trying to say is don't rely, I know I'm gonna get everybody mad at me, but don't rely on Google Scholar, right? Because yes, Google Scholar, people will put their searching in there and out will come some results. But if that's the only place that the journal will be found, then your research might be lost. Does that make sense? Now,
Yeah.
I made it sound very easy to be able to figure this out, but I recognize this is a very gray area, especially when you're looking at a new and emerging journal, right? They have a tendency to also resemble a predatory journal. So honestly, look at who the publisher is and look at who the editorial board is. But you really, and eventually, if there's enough momentum, it'll be picked up by the key key indexing sites as well. But that's the key thing, is findability, right?
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Neera. Does anyone have any final sort of thoughts or questions that they want to ask Neera? Okay, I think it's 6 o'clock, so we can end here. Thank you so much again, Neera. This was a great presentation and a great overview, like everyone has said in the comments as well. And thank you again for your time, and have a great evening, everyone. Thank you.
And I'm happy to be here.